Hello and welcome to The Big Picture with me, Ishan Russell. Today we focus on the sudden surge in food prices that sent forth rather worrying signals. With prices of vegetables and pulses rocketing, the government is increasing the size of the buffer stock of pulses to 0.80 million tonnes from the current 0.15 million tonnes. Teams are also being sent to Myanmar and Africa to scout for the legumes. It could also consider pumping in more food grain into the market to counter the food inflation's rising trend. On the vegetables front, the government hopes that this is a seasonal phenomenon and the rise in vegetable prices would abate in a few weeks with the arrival of the monsoons. But there are other factors as well. Monsoon presently is off to a shaky start with a 22% rain deficit. Also, the cooling in the prices of wheat, sugar and potatoes is a big worry. With consumer food price inflation at 7.55% at a 21-month high, what does this augur for the economy as a whole and what happens next on the prices front? To answer these questions tonight, I am joined by Yatish Rajawat, Senior Economic Commentator, Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, Professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and Biraj Patnaik, Principal Advisor, Office of the Commissioners to the SC. Also joining us on the phone line from Mumbai is Shaina NC, leader and spokesperson of the BJP. Yatish, I'll start with you. Let's understand how serious the problem is and the steps that have been taken. Are they effective enough to control it in the short term?
So, I think you're referring to the problem of the rise in the pulses prices. Yes. So, the rise in the pulses prices is a phenomenon which takes place almost every year. The variance of that rise varies every year depending upon the shortfall in the production and demand. There has been a shortfall. We have been producing around 18 million tons of pulses every year. Our demand has been growing from 19, 20, 21 and now 22 million tons every year. This gap, as you know, simple economics, supply-demand gap, prices will rise. Last week, as you know, before the numbers came in, the government announced that they're going to import extra amount of pulses. This happens every year. This is not a phenomena that has just occurred or is happening this year. This year, its impact on the inflation has been very high because the surge has been almost 32%. Now, can this problem be solved by Raghuram Rajan? No, it's not a monetary policy issue. It is a production and supply issue, and it can only be solved if the cropping pattern in the Indo-Gangetic plains, Haryana, Punjab, changes from the wheat-rice cycle and incorporates pulses into it.
All right, so that is really, that is a real big long-term measure that I think would have to be taken. But in the short term, the government is shoring up at least its stocks as far as pulses are concerned. But vegetables, Professor Chakraborty, are something that is really bothering because as in that meeting held by the Finance Minister, the Food and Civil Supplies Minister, Ramvilas Paswan, also pointed out, like, for example, tomatoes that are today selling at over 100 rupees a kilogram. Nothing much can be done about it except hope that monsoon arrives on time and this short period that we are witnessing this rise would abate.
Yeah, I think political economy of food inflation is very different than the general inflation, and food also affects poor most than anybody else. So I think it is that is why government is actually alarmed by this sudden increase in food inflation. But if we look at some data, it is the highest food inflation rate since August 2014. So it's almost 2 years after we are having a food inflation rate which is very high, and it's primarily due to the rise in vegetable prices and also the pulses. If it is a supply side issue, I beg to disagree because there were unseasonal rains which actually reduced supply. It's not supply management in that sense because the production has suffered. And in that context, I would also like to draw your attention to the proposal that was announced, the budget announcement that was made by the Honorable Finance Minister, where he said that monitoring of prices of essential commodities is a key element of good governance. A number of measures have been taken to deal with the problem of abrupt increase in price of pulses. Government has approved creation of buffer stock of pulses through procurement of minimum support price, which they have announced in June. Right. And also they have created a market stabilization fund of 900 crores. So my confusion here is, given this concern about that there can be a sudden increase in prices, I'm really surprised that why this sudden increase was not taken, why adequate measures were not taken beforehand to actually reduce or contain these basic commodity prices.
Yeah, Biraj, I wanted to get you in on that because he's pointing to a very important factor that you had the roadmap, you knew what needed to be done, but why wasn't that done?
Because you see, this is a government of hoarders and traders. So what is happening is that the only people who are benefiting out of this inflation are traders. Now the fact of the matter is the whole country saw 1 month ago, barely a month ago, onion selling at 1 rupee a ton. Farmers getting their tomatoes, not getting a remunerative price and dumping it on the road. What has happened to all of that? So obviously there is a lot of hoarding that is taking place. Now, traditionally, whether it's a Congress government or the BJP government, traditionally governments have always said, but we are not responsible for hoarding. It's the states who have to do. But in state after state today, you have the BJP in power. Why is the BJP not able to impress on their leaders or their own chief ministers to control hoarding? Number one. Number two, when Mr. Jaitley was leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha and Sushma Swaraj was leader of the opposition in the Rajya Sabha, if you look at the parliamentary debates when the National Food Security Act was being enacted, they were very firm that pulses should be part of the National Food Security Act and should be introduced in the PDS. So much so that Mr. Jaitley said that if this demand is not met, BJP will not support this legislation, which finally they did. Now they are in power for 2 years. Why are we not bringing the National Food Security pulses under the National Food Security Act? Let alone bring pulses under the National Food Security Act. We have not even implemented the Act 3 years after. And it has been extended illegally without parliamentary sanction on 3 occasions in the last 2 years. Insofar as what the outlook is, I think the outlook continues to be bleak because the low MSP price that has been announced this year and the fact that you have discouraged state governments from giving a bonus for MSP. This year, wheat procurement was shot by about 5 million metric tons. Next year, it's going to be the same story, irrespective of the monsoon. So, wheat inflation will be there and you will not be able to import wheat in because of elections in Punjab. Similarly, with sugarcane, you will not be able to import sugar even if the prices go up because of elections in UP. So, in my view, in all these factors, if you take that into account, structural change we've been talking about pulses, UPA spoke about it for 10 years. Nothing happened. So, in the short run, it doesn't look very good.
All right, Shaina and say strong charges being made over here. We do not have Shaina NC as of now. We'll try to get back to her. But Yatish, the point about monsoons, the fact that the monsoons were expected to be above normal, 106% in terms of average precipitation is what was expected. But it's 22% rain deficit right now. All Met departments, even from Australia, they're saying that monsoon will hit the subcontinent and will be normal. But is the government banking on too much on monsoon to address these concerns?
So, I mean, you must understand the background of the pulses cultivation to actually connect it to monsoons. It is not the monsoons which completely determine whether a farmer will produce pulses or not. The reason he does not produce pulses is basically because there is a procurement problem, there is a marketing problem, there is a pricing problem. Now, if he is not able to sell his produce, he cannot take a loss on his books. This is not an entrepreneur who can, subsidize his loss by borrowing from the bank or borrowing from, equity markets. So, he has changed his cropping pattern away from pulses. Whether the monsoons are good or bad will not change that cropping pattern. If pulses were to be planted, they have to be planted. An early pulses crop is planted in May. We've crossed that Rubicon on this hope that the monsoons will be good. So he's already looking at a wheat and rice.
But the argument that is being given, and I've read across media reports, is that because of the high prices of pulses already, the farmers would be incentivized to plant more pulses.
So this is the interesting part. So where is this high price and when is this high price? This high price is taking place right now. The crop comes out in July.
Exactly.
Okay. So this is the interim period. There is no crop in this is the part where the hoarders play the maximum gains because they have now jacked up price because there is no supply in the market. The supply will come in July and it will last August, September, October, November. Then the next crop takes on. So this is an artificial price hike that is taking place. Now, can the government control it? Yes, it can control it. Can the government solve this problem perpetually by changing cropping pattern? I don't think so. Because you need to change the way FCI works. You need to change the procurement process. You need to change MSP. Now, we've seen that this government has adopted one particular line on MSP per se. There is wheat and rice rotting in FCI godowns.
Right.
Irrespective of the production, we are already overflowing in FCI godowns across the country. So, there is no need to acquire or procure more. What is need to be acquired, procure more in July is pulses, which is not going to happen.
But you see, the minimum support price that you're giving for pulses is far lower than the market price. So, which farmer is going to sell you pulses at the minimum support price that you're sending? Number one. Number two.
No, the minimum support price might be lower, but the point is that if you go to any FCI go down, you will never see any procurement of pulses because they don't have mechanism and systems to procure it and to store it. So they've always been depending on.
There are two reasons for this. One, that till recently we were not required to keep a buffer stock of pulses. Now this government has started,
which I think is 0.80 million tons of buffer stock.
But you see, when you have a 5 to 7 million ton shortfall, 0.80 million ton of buffer stock is not going to help. You will only see those vans on television. Those vans will not reach people, because if those vans reach people with subsidized pulses, and we are talking about pulse at the rate of 120 kilos and celebrating that it's cheap, but nonetheless that's not going to reach. On the wheat, now for instance, if you look at it, we are just above the buffer norm today. 27 million metric tons of wheat you should have as a buffer norm. We are just above the buffer norm, which is the lowest procurement of wheat in the last 8 years. You know, the stock, if you look at the stock figures, the lowest in the last 8 years. The problem with imports is that government has no control over imports. You may import 5 million metric tons. What share of that is being procured by government? 10,000 metric tons. Out of the 4.5 to 5 million metric tons that you're importing, it's all being imported by private agencies. So how is that going to have an impact in providing subsidized food grain to the people? So in my view, the longer term, I completely agree with him. This is not contingent on the monsoons. You've cut down the irrigation budget by half. You've done away with the BRGF. You look at the last budget, you've done away with the Krishi Vikas Yojana substantially. So unless you invest in agriculture, you bring about a shift in the pattern of production, and you have pulses in the National Food Security Act, next year, I bet you we will be sitting in the same studio, because I have done it for many years in succession, and we'll be discussing the same issues.
All right, but that is indeed worrying. And also, Professor Chakraborty, I want to bring you in to talk about sugar, because sugar, the area under cultivation has gone lower, and as was being pointed out, that with UP elections, import of sugar would become difficult. So soon we could see, right now it's we're talking about tomatoes and potatoes, but sugar could be another point where the government could face a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, it might. All these essential commodities prices going up will create a huge problem and election down the corner will certainly be an issue. But I would like to differ on one aspect that we have been discussing. The sense I get here is that if the administered price mechanism works very well, then we can solve the problem of inflation. I think that's too simplistic. I think we should allow the market to function. I'm not saying that we should not procure, government should not procure food grain, government should not procure essential commodities. I think administered pricing mechanism also has created huge distortions and also promoted hoarding. So in some sense or other, because you know the price, that sets a benchmark, and then you play around with that. So I think it's a very complex problem, and there is no easy solution. And administered pricing helps whom? It helps the richer states, not the poorer states. That is the first point. Second point that I would like to talk about is the issue of structural weaknesses in the Indian agriculture and the system that we have. I think we have to understand the political economy of spending, government spending. And now government spending, if we look at, I was just before coming here looking at the budget, aggregate budget of the center and states together, 90% spending are at the state level. 10% spending is at the national level. I think national level, what central government is doing, central government is spending on areas probably that needs to be rationalized, where you give warehousing facilities, you develop rural infrastructure, you have cold storage. You are not doing that. but or agricultural research for that matter. But at the same time, why don't you see the different? Why do you see differential agricultural performance in different states? Because states gives different priorities to agriculture, and when most of the spending are at the state level, I think it's very important when you are talking about basic essential commodities produced and supplied to the market. I think there has to be a national strategy for agriculture, which we don't have, which we are missing at the moment.
See, I don't think so. I mean, what the professor is saying, the interesting part is that APM has distorted the market in terms of the fact that cropping pattern has changed from multiple crops to wheat and rice.
Right.
Now, all through the north, there's only wheat and rice happening.
Despite the fact that there is no water.
Despite the fact that there's dark area, dark zones, aquifers are depleted, they're still cultivating rice. Now, pulses, as you know, is a crop which is not drought resistant. In terms of yield, it has never been genetically modified or tissue culture adopted to increase the yield because the focus has not been there. And it is also a crop that is very local in their nature, in the sense that the seeds, there is no one seed that can be used across the country. Now, in this kind of a scenario, what is the government doing to promote pulses, different kind of pulses, in different kind of zones, in different parts of the country? It's not a one single national strategy, but it is a multiple level strategy which has to be adopted if you want to change the cropping pattern. And the problem is the cropping pattern. The farmer will only shift when he says that I'm producing this much and I'm going to get. Why do they produce according to MSP? Because they know there is an assured price there. MSP is an assured price.
So that is
in a pulses kind of environment, he's never sure, one, that will the drought wipe out my crop? Will diseases are most rampant in pulses than any other crop? Because we have not been able to develop a disease resistant seed. So he doesn't want to take a chance.
But Ishan, if you look at it, if administered prices are the problem, I agree that they do have an impact on the market insofar that they change cropping patterns. But then why are we seeing an inflation in a product which has no administered price? The current round of inflation is not because of MSP in rice and wheat. The current round of inflation is in all products where there is no minimum support price.
So that's because of hoarding, you're saying?
Absolutely.
No, I was not
just
attributing
that.
MSP as a reason.
Right.
I was trying to say that MSP is going to solve the problem. Could be
But
the problem.
if you had pulses in the National Food Security Act, if they were being distributed, that is the best way of stabilizing prices in the market.
But then for distribution, you need to procure and somebody needs to produce.
Absolutely.
Now to produce, who is going to produce? It's not going to, I mean, if you want to import it again, that's not the permanent solution. It's not a sustainable solution.
If you guarantee a minimum support price to the
So
farmer.
that cycle has to begin from from procurement.
All right, so basically I think what is being pointed as in terms of a larger strategy, a larger approach towards tackling these, and they're all interlinked and interrelated, we're tackling them in a very short term, isn't it, Professor Chakraborty? That in terms of long-term measures, while the vision might be there of what needs to be done in terms of controlling prices of vegetables or pulses or controlling inflation, the measures that are being taken are in the very short term.
Government definitely has a role when it comes to basic essential commodities. So short-term measures will have to be supply chain management so that producers come to the market and the prices come down, because it has a huge distributional impact. If the food inflation goes high, it has a distributional impact on the poor. So that has to be done. That's a supply chain issue. But on the long-term side, which we are talking about, I think we need to reform our MSC. We allow the market to play its role, and also we need infrastructure investment in agriculture so that perishable goods are just not allowed to rot because they are not been transported to the market. I think that is where the reform is required, and a lot of investment that we need in agriculture. But the kind of issues that we are talking about also in agricultural investment, we are talking about FDI in retail without supporting infrastructure. We are expecting that somebody else will come and do that infrastructure. I don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
I think we need larger investment in agriculture, both by the public sector as well as supporting investment by the private sector in the long run. Yeah. Okay. But short run, definitely government has to manage these supply side issues. And already there is a fund that has been created, which is called the Market Stabilization Fund, with a corpus of 900 crores. Hope that fund starts working and they stabilize those prices of the essential commodities.
Ishan, in the short run, we can clearly say that this government has failed, like the previous government had failed in controlling inflation. One. So, and let's not blame it on the monsoons, because
You're saying inflation was never under the control.
because you see, it was never under control in the sense that when we knew, 2 months ago we knew this problem is going to come. But the finance minister convened a meeting after only after inflation becomes a headline news. You know, if they had met 2 months ago and said, look, this is a situation, this is bound to happen. What are the steps we are taking to prevent hoarding? Government could have procured onions and tomatoes when farmers were doing a distress sale.
But the Food and Civil Supplies Minister says he can't procure tomatoes because it's perishable and they can't store.
Absolutely, but at that point in time, there should have been an intervention by the state. It did not happen. So farmers have lost out the money. The money due to inflation is not being made by the farmers. Who is making it? It's being made by the traders, essentially. Okay. So the fact that this hoarding has taken place right under the nose of the finance minister and the food minister, in a time of severe rural distress. None of the Supreme Court orders on National Food Security Act expansion on the drought have been followed by the government. Okay. Not a single order has been complied with. So I think this is a completely shocking failure on part of the Food Ministry and the Finance Ministry to get their act together on time to act on inflation.
Very quickly, Yatish, because then I have to take closing comments.
The basic point of failure here is the Food and Supply Ministry and the Agriculture Ministry. The onus of responsibility lies on they knew about this situation. It is not for the Ministry of Finance to act on this issue. For the last 15 years, we've seen that the Food and Supply Ministry is a ministry that is only responsible for opening tenders for imports. And opening tenders for import is nothing but a sign of weak government and corruption. Because you're benefiting a private enterprise by opening up those tenders, which timing you know, pricing you know, and you're just handing over them the profit to get those produce in the market. And rightfully, as he pointed out, why wasn't there a planning beforehand for this? Because you knew that the cropping pattern is not changed. You know, you have enough data on that. This procurement itself could have been staggered and done from February onwards, March onwards. Because you're going to sit, every year you're going to face this situation in June and July. Now, tomato is a completely different ballgame, and sugar has its own dynamics.
Political economy.
And sugar has a much higher dependence on political economy. And there are two components there. One is the mills themselves, which is, you see, the farmer in sugar economy does not actually get payment for 1 year.
Okay.
So, you know, and the government basically has released 3,000 odd crores last year to the sugar mills, not to the farmers. So the reason he's moving away from sugar is the fact that, you know, for 1 year he's not been paid for it.
Okay.
And in some cases, some places in UP, it's 2 years that the arrears are running.
Yes, and there were protests over that as well. Yeah. So, final comments, gentlemen. Professor Chakraborty, I'll start with you in terms of the larger impact on the economy. You know, industrial production is down, inflation is creeping up, and this could really put the 7.9% plus growth as the government wants to in a tizzy.
See, first, I hope that it's only a short-term phenomenon. If it is not a short-term phenomenon, and it's going to, if it persists, I think the first issue will be the monetary policy stance will be hardened. So you don't expect the interest rate coming down. Now, if you look at last 3, 4, 5 years data, the investment as a percentage of GDP is coming down. And on top of that, if the policy rate hardens, because RBI is also talking about monetary policy targeting of 5%, not beyond that. Now CPI is already higher than 5. So it might be the case that RBI may raise interest rates. So that can actually make macroeconomic situation quite difficult in the months to come if it is not a short-term phenomenon. Second issue, I would like to say that the budget also is going to get more inflationary because of the impending 7th Pay Commission award, because a lot of money is going to come in.
Also another factor
so this is also a very difficult challenge the government has to face.
All right, so the government in a very tricky spot. Final comment I'll give to you, Biraj. You've been very critical of the government and its handling of the situation. So just outline it for us that if action is not taken and taken fast, then indeed a problem for the overall economy, isn't it?
I'm less worried about the overall economy numbers as I'm worried about what the impact this is having on the poorest households in this country who have been deprived of benefits of the National Food Security Act of subsidized food grains for the last 3 years in a year of grave rural distress. So for me, the farmer suicides, the migration, distress migration, people living under flyovers in our cities, migrating out of Bundelkhand all over the place because of the drought. So for me, that is a much of much greater concern, and I hope that the government will take adequate steps. I hope that the National Food Security Act will have pulses in it, and they will stick to what they said in Parliament when the act was being debated. And I do hope with Professor Chakraborty and all of us here who've agreed that unless we address the structural reasons, next year we'll still be sitting in the studio debating the same issue with you, Ishan.
All right, so let's hope that that does not happen. We do not discuss this issue again, and it's only a short-term spike that we've seen. But indeed, if it isn't, then a real big problem. But thank you very much, Yatish, Biraj, and Professor, for coming in and helping us understand what's happening with food inflation. Well, it's spiking up right now. Let's see whether the government's measures that have been taken are enough to control it. For now, we'll revisit this issue if this story continues to stay as important as this. Thanks so much for watching for now.